Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.
Hey, everybody, welcome into another episode of Rounding the Bases, presented by Community America Credit Union, invested in you. I am going to say what I so often say. I am excited about today's guest. By the way, hard to believe that as we release this, it is May of 2025. You might be listening to this in 2030 or I don't know what, but I know that my guest will bring it with some incredible insight and inspiration. Today, he's a guy that I've had the chance to get to know a little bit in recent months, and so I'm excited to share his story and his work with you. First off, a shout out to my friends at Chief of Staff Kansas City. Doesn't matter whether you're in Kansas City, whether you're on the West Coast like my guest today, the East Coast, or wherever it might be. If you are in the hunt for a job or you're looking to hire someone, if you're looking for a great resource, I partner with these guys on so much because I believe in who they are, what they believe in. chiefofstaffkc.com, making connections that matter. I made a really cool connection, a bunch of them for that matter, during the past baseball offseason, and we'll dig a little bit deeper on the future, or in the future, with this when I have on this woman. Her name is Michelle Villalobos, and she runs some really incredible programs, and I'm working on a lot of stuff, or we'll be working on a lot of stuff with her. But in the program and the event that I had gone to, I met a lot of really amazing people, and those were the connections. And some of those people, Leanne Webster being one of them, have been on this podcast since. I really took a mental note of saying, look, there's almost everybody that was there for that matter. They'd be great for the podcast. They'd be great for the podcast. And my guest today certainly falls in that category, and just super excited to have him. I'm joined by a Top Gun turned top authority who has redefined what it means to lead. His name is Dave Rosenberg, a retired F-14 naval officer and founder of Locked On Leadership. As the premier expert on radical accountability, he equips military-minded leaders with tactical strategies to build teams that rise to the expectation of excellence. It does more than transform individuals into self-directed achievers. It creates a culture of high performance that is perpetually mission-ready long after motivation has faded. I think it's a message for everyone, whether you're in the military, whether you're not, whether you might be, whether you've never been, whatever it is. If you're interested in leadership, Dave is your guy. And we got the Goldberg Rosenberg law firm going on here right now, and two guys with Philadelphia roots. One that was rooting for the Eagles to win the Super Bowl this year, that would be Dave, and one that was not, that would be me. But I'm okay with all of it. Happy to be joined right now by Dave Rosenberg. Dave, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Joel. Excited to be here. I could see, by the way, while you're in broadcasting, you have a turn of the phrase. It's amazing. I never felt so good after an introduction like you just made me feel. I do have one small correction. I didn't.
Yeah, give me the correction.
I didn't retire. I'm a former naval flight officer, but I did my 7 years and I got out back in '93. So unfortunately, I don't draw the pension.
Okay, well, can we change that? I don't know if we could change that. We probably can't change that. Either way, maybe you don't want to change it. But either way, you served our country, and I think that you are serving so many leaders now in sharing your expertise and making them and making the world a better place. So where to start? Let's talk about the military background, because it's so much of what you do to this day. And I know will forever be a part of who you are and the messaging that you're doing. Give me a little background in terms of your military service.
Sure. I went to college to get a degree in engineering, but my heart and soul, since I was 8 years old, I read not Starship Trooper. Now I'm blanking. Space Cadet, which is a Robert Heinlein children's book, and fell in love with the idea of going into space. So I wanted to be an astronaut. And I was speaking with a buddy of mine at school. I was at Temple University, Philadelphia, go Owls. And I mentioned this to him, and he said, well, you ought to go into naval aviation. And I said, I wore glasses. I'm corrected now with LASIK and all, but I was in glasses at the time. And I said, well, I can't fly. dawn of 2020. And he said there's this thing called a naval flight officer, which if you watch Top Gun, that's what Goose was. And so we're the non-pilots in the aircraft. We're doing all sorts of different things depending on the aircraft you're in. And I checked into it. Next thing I know, I decided to check it out. And so a couple of years later, I find myself in Pensacola, officer candidate school. I like to relate things to movies. So those of you who remember Richard Gere and I just blanked on the movie name where he was in Seattle. You can't handle. Any rate, what's that movie?
Now you're. I'm gonna find it.
Yeah,
and then we'll clean it up.
Give me your DOR.
All I can think of right now is You Can't Handle the Truth.
Yeah, that's the wrong movie. That's my wife's. My wife was a JAG, so she has that one. But at any rate, I get my commission and I joined the service, and that was in 1987. Did my training, got fortunate to be selected to fly in the F-14. So that was the fighter in Top Gun. So I was Goose. Spoiler alert, I did live. And so next thing I know, I found myself out at sea, and this was in 1990. We're supposed to do a 5-month deployment, visit all the ports of call, because next year we were going to move to Japan when Iraq decided to invade Kuwait. And so August 2nd, 1990, a day that was seared in my mind, because woke up at an early morning flight. So I went to breakfast, something you didn't do every day. And I picked up the ship's newspaper. It says, Iraq invades Kuwait. And one of the guys sitting at my table, a guy by the name of Robert Berg, goes, boys, we're going to war. And literally about 2 minutes later, the loudspeaker system comes on. It's the captain of the ship. And he says, attention, all hands, this is the captain speaking. Iraq has invaded Kuwait. We just got orders. We're making best possible speed to Gonzo Station. That's the Gulf of Oman, northern zone of operation. All flight operations are suspended. All flight crews report to your ready room. And we spent the next week planning what became known as Operation Desert Shield. At the time, you couldn't even say those words. And we spent 111 days at sea without a port call, protecting U.S. assets as they were coming into Saudi Arabia, getting ready for what was to become then Desert Storm. And that was my first deployment. It was a ton of fun. It was also really stressful at the same time, right? Both of those things exist simultaneously. I did a second deployment for Operation Southern Watch a couple of years later, where this was after the war, and we're protecting the no-fly zone, and got out in 1993, and that's my naval career.
I'm curious about that moment too. By the way, officer and a gentleman.
That was it. Thank you. Yes.
I was right there with you. I'm like, I could picture everything, but I can't. But I had the opportunity while you were talking to Google and listen all at the same time. And that's all it took. But my mind kind of went to A Few Good Men, as you said. And so I knew it wasn't that, because I knew Richard Gere wasn't in that movie. Anyway, some people are better with that pop culture in a heartbeat, but I agree with you. I always think in movies that I forget who they are. But that moment, that moment you talk about, where it could be two different emotions all at the same time. Like this is what you prepared for. This is what, now, I don't know, like not every single member of the military is going to have the exact same feeling. Like not everybody's going to be like, it's go time, let's go. There are going to be some that are like, oh boy, I'd rather not. In the end, you have a job to do and you're going to go do it. And I'm just curious, what, as all those emotions, and you hear that announcement, like it's go time, like this is it. This is what we train to do, whether it's what you want, don't want, indifferent, whatever it is. What were the emotions like at that point?
At that point, that was probably excitement. There really wasn't any dread or fear. This, to your point, this is what we trained to do. We had been through exercises. We had simulated similar situations, right? It's never the same, right? It's never like practice, but we had trained with similar situations. We did last minute briefings and trainings and mission planning and all of that stuff. That's part of the workups, getting ready to deploy. But this was real. And so there was a sort of heightened sense of you're not going to screw around. Not that we screwed around during training, but it puts this little extra sharpness to it. But the negative emotion didn't really come from fear or anything to do with what we were about to do. It is you're spending time at sea, and you're tell people it's Groundhog Day. Every day's a Monday, and it's rinse, repeat, do it all over again. And while they're different, they're the same, and it starts to wear on. And so now you're 30, 40 days. You haven't been into port call. What happens is, as people go through their emotional stuff, they're missing home, they're missing their wives. I was engaged at the time to my practice wife. And so, all of that goes on. We had the news crews on, they were recording, we were made recordings for home saying hi, all that stuff. So somebody might get a care package in the mail, and our only contact with home at that time was through the U.S. Postal Service. This is before email. So when my wife deployed, my real wife, when she deployed in 97, our first year we got married, I was able to stay in touch with her through email. And so the carrier, the C-2 CODs, those are the cargo aircraft that would land and bring us our mail, would land, and they would announce on the loudspeaker system, 5,000 pounds of Pony Express. So that's how much mail is on board. And then all you got was class 3 junk mail, right? And you're like, oh, but somebody else would get a care package from home. And so they're all happy. And so what tends to happen is those of us who might not be in the best mental state because we hadn't heard from home start to sort of tear down each other. And you're trying not to do that. So it becomes this real emotional roller coaster as you're just doing the same thing and nothing is happening. So you're on the edge, ready for combat, and nothing is happening.
It's such a different world. I just want to get into this because I think, look, those of us that did not serve in the military, we can't relate to what any of you have gone through. That could be as something as simple as, I don't know that it's simple, but just basic training. Like, I mean, the amount of sacrifice, but then I think I'm speaking for myself. Like, I could kind of envision what it's like to be in the Army or most of the branches, I guess. But when you start talking about being on a ship, like that's a world that a lot of people can't relate to. Like I can't imagine what that's like to live like that. Like what was that like to live in what to me now, I know today's different with all the technology, but like what it must feel like to be in potentially a very isolated world.
Well, and it is isolated. It's a very small, and the difference between what I did on an aircraft carrier, we had 5,000 people versus a small boy, a destroyer, a cruiser, one of the smaller ships where there might be 50 people, right, or less. Just imagine your world. But even when a carrier of 5,000 people, your world isn't all 5,000 people. I never interacted with the snipes, the in the engineering department, or most of the ship. I interacted with the air wing predominantly, and the flight deck crew. And so your world probably consists of 200-300 people max that you see on a regular basis. What did we have? Probably 30 officers in my squadron. That's your core world. And imagine living at work, and your work is an industrial power plant. You have engine oil smells, noises, 24/7. It's a 24/7 operation. And as I mentioned before, every day is the same. So, we had a few sayings that might capture it. We used to say cruise is a lot like prison, except for there's a higher probability of drowning. The days seem like weeks and the weeks seem like days. And that's the truth. It's like a day can take forever, but then you look and go, oh my God, it's been a month already when you look behind you. But then you look ahead and the 4 or 5 months left seems like forever. You just can't vision the end of it. And it's the routine that keeps you sane. And frankly, for those of us who flew, flying kept you sane. Like
It got you out.
yeah. And you know, when you're flying, you have to be completely present. Okay. Because so as you, and even like today, I'm a pilot, when I take off, all the crap has to stay on the ground because
Mhm.
you need to be ahead of the aircraft. You have to be thinking what's going on and be anticipatory in order to do it safely. And when you're doing it at a high level, like in fighters, it's even more so. So you really need to be present. And so that was sort of cathartic.
There are lessons, by the way, I think in everything you just talked about, and then we'll get into what you do, because you have a gift of taking these lessons and helping leaders with them. But when I hear you talk about being present, yeah, you kind of got no choice. You're flying a plane, right? Like this is life and death stuff here. Whether anybody is chasing you or not, you don't get this right, you're not living. So pretty easy to put the distractions down and leave them on the ground. Or maybe it's not easy, maybe it is, but you have no choice. But I think there's so many of us that could learn from that, how much more effective we would be. Maybe our lives aren't on the line if we could eliminate those distractions. I mean, I wonder about the young pilots coming up nowadays, or anybody for that matter. Like I am not a anti-generation Gen Z. Like I work with mostly Gen Z athletes now, and I have to meet them where they're at. But I also know that those superstar athletes that I'm covering aren't that much different than my kids and anyone from that generation. They grew up with the cell phones. They came of age during the pandemic, all this stuff. And so, like, these young pilots or these young military members in any branch that are coming up have grown up with all these distractions, and they've got a lot on the line. But that could be true for any profession too. Like how do you eliminate those distractions? For you, it was easy. It was life and death, right? But how are you able to, so to speak, leave things on the ground? That could be a mental thing too, right? You might be going up in the air and something's going on.
Yeah, and frequently it was. As I said, you're 111 days at sea. You haven't gotten a letter from home. You don't know what's going on with my then fiance or whatever it might be. Um, whomever. Maybe the last letter was there was a problem at the house and there was a leak and she was dealing with it or whatever. And I'm I don't remember all the details, but I know I got letters like that. And you're worried. Okay, what's going on? We just bought this house. Is this right? And you got to leave that behind. And they teach you to compartmentalize, right? And when it's time to fly, it's time to fly. And really just staying focused on what you're doing and the mission. It's a skill. And I think part of it too, though, is allowing yourself to feel it when it's time, right? If you stuff it away and never take it out, it will burst out. And because more stuff adds on, and then you start, our tendency is to start, extrapolating what do we think is going to go on, what is going on, right? And then you just push that away, and eventually that's going to burst out. So we need to take it out and look at it when it's appropriate. And I think that's where the skill comes in.
Okay, let's talk about Locked On Leadership. And you've been doing this for a long time, taking so much of those leadership lessons and helping leaders. And you're a speaker, you're an author, you're a podcast host, and all the other things. So I think two-part question. One, I'd like to know more about Locked On Leadership, but also tell me about the influence of your time in the Navy and leading people during the Navy, how that shaped you into being the leader that teaches others these days.
Sure. My signature keynote, it's called Life or Death Accountability, how to get your team to act like lives depend on them only when livelihoods do. And it centers around a story, which is a true story, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but a true story, something that happened to me in the Navy. And this really was a significant moment in my life. I was assigned, went to Fighter Squadron 211. I was assigned to be what's known as the legal officer. The legal officer, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but we go to a month training on the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and we administer that in commands that are too small to have attorneys, JAG officers attached to them. And one of your duties is when people get written up for some sort of infraction of any type, could be minor, could be major, you then get that paperwork. You're the first person that goes to, and then you make an assessment what to do with it. And it could be anything from, a courts martial, which I was involved with one, to just a conversation, and what they call a verbal reprimand. And I got a report about a young sailor who was written up for dereliction of duty. That sounds horrible, but really it just means he wasn't doing his job right. And sort of making a 90-minute keynote as quick as possible. He was trained to be an electronic technician. He was assigned to the janitor, what we call the first lieutenants, to be a janitor, and he was disgruntled. It's not why he joined the Navy. And like so many other places, you have to pay your dues, and there's jobs that have to get done in a command that we don't have people who are rated. That's not their primary duty. Like being a janitor, and new people, that's what you do when they're trying to figure it out. And so I had to counsel him. That was the first thing, counsel him on why he needs to do a good job. And I pulled a lesson from my dad, who was a school teacher in Kensington in Philadelphia. It's a terrible neighborhood. Another movie reference. That's where Rocky lived. Okay. And he did a really good job. My dad had a high success rate of getting kids to go to college in a community where most people aspire to be a union worker. It's the highest aspiration they have. Not that there's anything wrong with being a union worker, but there's generation.
That's all they knew.
That's all they knew. There's generational welfare. He at the end of his career, he taught the grandchildren of some of his first students, and
Wow.
They've been in welfare for 3 generations. And so I took some of his advice, and I counseled this sailor about how there's no unimportant jobs, and that how his job affects everybody else in the squadron from a morale perspective, that he was really the morale officer. If the squadron looked great, people felt good. If the squadron looked like crap, people felt crappy, right? And I sent him on his way. And frankly, I wouldn't remember this story at all, except for we were coming back from my second deployment, and we stopped in Hawaii. And one of the things they do really cool in the Navy is they allow friends and family to ride the boat with you from Hawaii back to San Diego. They call it Tiger Cruise. And my dad joined me. And when I went to pick him up at the airport, he was talking to this sailor who I barely knew from the squadron. I mean, I knew him to say hello, but I didn't remember this incident at all till my dad got in the car, and he goes, "Wow, that guy has a lot of respect for you." What do you mean? And then my dad told me the story from the sailor's perspective of how I counseled him. And then it's what he said next that said, he said, he credits you with saving his career. I was 30 years old, 31 years old, something like that at that time. And while I did the best I could to counsel him, I never really thought about what impact that would have on somebody. And it turned his career around. And that sort of set me on a path. So when I left the Navy, I, started in management, sales management, and I was a VP of operations. Both of those positions were in small companies that had no processes, no procedures in place. And so the first thing I did was I wrote out manuals, because in the military, everything had a manual. And I started training people to the manual, and people started performing better. And slowly but surely, as I started seeing this pattern, I started developing this sort of methodology that I repeated as I moved up in my career and became president of companies, where I started setting people up for success. And the other thing in the military that I learned is that our job as officers is not to tell people what to do. That's what the chiefs do. It's to remove the barriers and obstacles that keep them from doing it, which frequently had to do with their home life, the distractions that kept them away. And that became a hallmark of my civilian career as well. And over, well, it's been 35 years since I got out of the Navy, but I've been doing this for 10 years. So over the 25 years that I was involved with private businesses as a, executive of some sort, I created what I now call my radical accountability methodology.
And there's so much that you're doing with it too. And I, look, the big programs that you're running, they're also history lessons in terms of leadership. I mean, we're talking about a lot to do with Churchill and D-Day and these incredible, unbelievable trips. I mean, this is what our friend Michelle Villalobos would call the big back end. This isn't just going out and doing a keynote. I know you love the keynotes. I love the keynotes. This is big stuff. I want to hit on that before we get to our baseball themed questions. What I know that you've got, well, I think you'll always have some big events coming up, but I know you've got a trip to London and that one is coming up later this year in the fall, and I'm sure many others. Tell me about these, because these, by the way, seem like they would just be like a cool vacation trip, to go with. You could go on the road and get a guide for some of these things. It's obviously so much more than that. Tell me about this.
Sure. So, I mean, what you're referring to, first of all, leadership hasn't changed in the 300,000 years that Homo sapien has walked the earth. We've always chosen leaders who have set us up for survival, the best chance of survival. That's really all leadership is about, is setting people up so they can survive. Now, great leadership is not just surviving, it's about thriving. And so historically, leaders have always done the same thing. It's from a cultural perspective, how they do it may be different. And so I have created what I call Command Expedition, leadership lessons from iconic battlefields. As I mentioned earlier, or at least alluded to, if you can lead people when life is on the line, and think about combat, right? You're getting people to do things that are really, really dangerous, and they could lose their life doing it, and they do it willingly. Right? That's leadership. How do they get them to do that? When we can't get people to, do their job and there's nothing that critical on the line, right? You would think it'd be harder to get people to sacrifice their life or at least potentially do it. And so there's a lot we can learn from that leadership. My first one, it's based around Battle of Britain, and we're going to England. It was originally planned for this fall. I actually have had to push it out to spring of 2026. But what we're going to do is we're going to England for 6 days. It's an amazing trip. We'll start off going to the Churchill War Room. I have, before it's even open to the public, private tour with a historian to dig into Churchill's leadership. If you think about what Churchill had to do, the mindset in England at the time that was really torn and divided. Some people wanted to capitulate. Some people wanted to make a pact with the Germans and the Nazis. And then there was Churchill, who was dead set against that. We must fight at all costs. And he was able to persuade the entire country to see his perspective and come around. Imagine getting your team all aligned in the same direction to the point where they could withstand bombing every single night, which is what happened during the Blitz. Every night, bombs were falling on England, and a small group of fighter pilots defended the entire country until, eventually the Germans gave up on that. So that's a clarity of sight and strategic thinking and the ability to persuade others that every leader can benefit from. He was also a master at his time management. He didn't get out of bed until 11:30 every day and still got more done than two other people. Okay. So how much more effective would people be? We're going to then go explore what it's like to make decisions under pressure. And I mean real pressure, because we're going to get up in T-67 Firefly trainers, those are aircraft, and dogfight each other. Imagine having to make decisions at 400 miles an hour. And if you make the wrong decision, you're dead. Now, we're going to be we're going to have instructors in there. You're not really going to be dead, but you'll be simulated death. And you learn the lessons that as fighter pilots we have to learn, which is evaluate quickly, make things happen. We're going to explore the leadership of Eisenhower as he prepared for D-Day. He was somebody who could take failures and turn them into future successes. Like his ability to take Well, it was really a total mess up, the Operation Torch, the landing in Africa, and turned that into the most successful and largest amphibious landing of D-Day. So we're going to dig into that. And then finally, the Channel Islands, Guernsey specifically. Most people don't realize that the British ceded the Channel Islands to the Germans early in the war, and they were under occupation for 5 years. You want to develop resilient teams? Let's explore how they did it. Okay. So it's going to be 6 amazing days. It's going to be spring of 2026. The new dates will be out. Probably take me a couple of weeks to get those with my travel partners. And this is what I'm only taking no more than 10 hand-selected leaders on this. So this is going to be a really select group of people. And if you're interested, come to my website and apply there, because it is an application process.
Yeah, the website, and it's more than just for this too. I mean, you could learn more about Dave's book, Locked on Leadership, learn about his keynotes and all of his services, lockedonleadership.com. And we'll have that in the show notes, and I'll mention it again before we wrap up. I mean, what an incredible journey. And, I sit there and think about some of the names that you're dropping. I actually watched the first episode. I need to get to the others. I think there's a 4-part series on Netflix on Churchill. And I watched the first, and it was spectacular. I mean, just so well done. I think they were able to go back and enhance some of the old video, so it felt like you were back there. And then we're lucky enough here in Kansas City, where I haven't been yet to the Eisenhower Library, but that's only 160 miles away in Abilene, Kansas. I need to get there. I've been to the Truman Library, which is about 35 minutes from my house, multiple times. And I don't think you know this. I was a journalism major. That's the obvious part. And then I double majored in history, not with any thought that it would do anything for my career, but I enjoyed history. And I looked up at a certain point and I'm like, well, I've taken a lot of history classes, might as well get the major. So I'm fascinated by all of it. And certainly now with, my doing keynotes and getting on stage, any bit of leadership I want to be able to soak up. And obviously you're living and breathing that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we wrap things up, but let's get to the baseball themed questions. I'm sure you were a Phillies fan growing up, or maybe still are. I don't know. You can push back on that if you're not, but
yeah, it's I used to be much bigger baseball fan than I am today. Honestly, I think as I've gotten older, the game's just gotten a little slow for me.
Yeah. Well, come on. You're in fighter jets too. You're used to speed, I guess. Okay. The baseball themed questions though, regardless.
And I'm a hockey player, right? So,
and you're a hockey player. That's in my final 4 questions, by the way. So I'm going to get to that. But biggest home run that you've hit professionally, what is it?
I give a lot of thought to this because, I mean, even professionally, there could be a lot of different areas, but I think it's probably in my sales career where I made a sales call on a company that was just looking to replace their voicemail. So for us, it wasn't even our major brand. Their phone equipment wasn't the brand we sold. It was one we serviced. And it would have been about a $10,000 sale. The company's called Document Science. I still remember this is like 25 years ago. And I ended up selling $150,000 whole brand new phone system to them.
Isn't that amazing that all these years later that still sticks with you?
Yeah. Well, it was, again, this is like, hitting it over to the giant green monster, right? It's this because, it was a real lesson for me in listening and asking good questions, because I uncovered some needs that all my competitors did was say, "Oh, you want a new voicemail? What are you looking for in a voicemail?" And then here's what we got. And I asked them about their telecommunication stuff and found out that they were spending, thousands of dollars a month on teleconferences. This is before video, right? Where they were calling into all their salespeople around the country. So I replaced the service with their own equipment. And by doing that, it saved them thousands of dollars a month. And I made what was the largest sale in the history of my company at that time.
Yeah. And I love just the lessons learned from it too, the importance of listening. And so that's what stays with you more than anything. How about a swing and a miss along the way? It can't be the practice wife, a swing and a miss along the way. And what did you learn from it?
I got to be frank. I thought about this and thought about this and thought about this, and I just don't see the misses. I just look at the lessons all the time. And it's, probably would be when my Delta V Communication, which was my telecom business, my second business, I had to sell that in 2009 because the bubble had crashed. And I guess that my goal was never to, have a small company and sell it. It was to build it into a really big company, and that never manifested. And the lesson learned was the value of recurring revenue. We were a technology business. It was 100% transactional. And when the economy shut down in the '08, what do they call that? The Great Recession, nobody was investing in technology. And, I maxed out my line of credit, and then I sold the business. Fortunately, I was able to get more than enough to pay off the line of credit. That was my only goal. So I didn't have to encumber my wife and my family with the personal debt. But, it's the value of recurring revenue.
Okay, and then the big one, or at least my favorite, is small ball. I mean, I wrote 2 books now with the title Small Ball in them. The little things, and certainly when you're up in the air, you better get those little things and the big things right, for that matter. But the little things in leadership, I mean, there's so much there that can make you successful. What is small ball to you?
Yeah, it's funny that my book, Locked On Leadership, the Tactical Business Guide of Creating a Culture of Consistency, Courage, and Caring, really is all about small ball. When I wrote the book, what I wanted to get across is that real leadership is not the big rousing speeches. Braveheart, you've got that speech William Wallace gives before the war. It says, "Sure, you could run away and live, but or you have the St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry the Eighth, I think it was, or seventh, Shakespeare, right? That's not leadership. I mean, that is a aspect of leadership, but leadership is more than just that. Leadership is the little things you do every single day that make a huge, disproportionate difference, that accumulate, which is what happens in small ball too, that accumulate to have this huge difference. It's recognizing looking for things that everybody did, one at a time, that you can praise somebody on every day to reinforce good behaviors. It's the courage to talk to somebody about the behaviors that don't measure up so that they can eliminate them from them, right? It's making small process changes on a daily basis that help improve the process and make things more efficient. I tell people all the time, if you make 1% improvement every single day, in 70 days, because of compounding, in 70 days, you've improved 100%. In 140 days, you've improved 200%. In 210 days, you've improved 400%, right? In another 70 days, 280, you've improved 800%, right? It's exponential. That's small ball. Little improvements every day consistently.
So dead on. That is so good. And that will allow me to segue into my 4 final questions as we round the bases. You referenced playing the game of hockey, and you are a guy that picked it up later in life, from what I understand as well. I guess that gives me some hope still. My kid's the hockey player. I could never get past the poor skating, and every time I try, I'm just not going anywhere. But if I were to play, I know I'd love it, because my goodness, anybody that gets the hockey bug, they love it. How did you come to it so late, and what did you love about it?
Sure. So my wife, I've been a fan, right, since the Broad Street Bullies. So my wife and I discovered a hockey rink that we didn't know about in the town next to our town we used to live in. It's actually where the Gulls, who are the AHL affiliates for the Ducks, play, where they train, I should say. And so we just thought, let's just go skating. And we didn't have skates at the time, so we went to the pro shop and bought skates. And Bauer puts on a free clinic, probably around the country, and I know around the country, called Learn to Play. Most of the time, these are for kids, right? But there are adult Learn to Play. And they lend you the gear, and it's 3 1-hour things, sessions. So we're like, let's go check it out. And to your point, by the way, I couldn't skate. I mean, I could skate in a straight line. Like if I went into a rink, I could have made around the circle without falling on my tail, but I couldn't skate. I couldn't stop at all. Like the first thing they do at this Learn to Play is they skate as fast as you can from, one goal line to the other. And I stop by crashing into the boards. And it was, I tell people it must be what it's like when somebody gets crack for the first time. I don't know, never had it, but I was like, oh my God, this is so much fun. And the last session we did a little 3-on-3, half court hockey, and I was so exhausted and so tired. I remember the puck was like 4 feet from me. I didn't even know how to get there, but I was like, I want more of this. And so they had a rookie league. And so I joined the rookie league and we started taking lessons and skating 3-4 times a week. I'm in 2 leagues. My wife's in 3 leagues now. We play all the time. I can't get enough of it. It's the greatest thing I've ever done. And I'm so happy I did it.
I love that. And I know that just things like that can bring you so much joy. Now you've got another sport that you've been involved in, and this would be maybe more, not maybe, is at a level of mastery because you've been around it for a long time, multiple black belts across several martial arts disciplines. When did that start and where are you at now? That's not a world that I've ever lived in, but I've got a lot of respect for it.
Yeah, when I was 13 years old, they built a Jewish community center in the northeast part of Philly, and they had a martial karate school there, and so I started with gymnastics and karate. I gave up on the gymnastics pretty quickly, but I continued with karate and continued until I joined the Navy. So I got a black belt in what is known as Okinawan Kempo in Philadelphia, and then joined the Navy. And it sat fallow for 10 years till I came out here. And when I was engaged to, actually, when I got married to my real wife, as opposed to the practice wife. So this is after I got out of the Navy, our first year of marriage. She deployed. She was an active duty JAG. And I found a karate studio out here in Poway, the same town where the ice rink exists. And so I started all over again. It's American Kempo as a white belt there. And, I trained until I got my 3rd degree black belt there, which was 2011 when that happened. I taught for a couple more years. I'm not active anymore. That got replaced by hockey. But, so yeah, I trained for many decades in Kempo of one form or another.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, I don't need to know much about it to know the amount of discipline and everything that goes into that. And so, yeah, great. Now you get to channel some of that with the fun of hockey. All right, 3rd question, and then the 4th one, we'll tie it all together with some purpose. I've never asked anybody this question, but I just think with as much of a historian as you are, and as much of a leader and a trainer of leaders, and all of your background, I so often can ask people about an influence or a favorite athlete or a this or that. And, maybe it's pick your favorite, Super Bowl champion, Philadelphia Eagle or whatever. But I want to ask you who you believe the most influential leader, or who has been the most influential leader on you historically, not face to face, but, you've talked about Churchill. Like, who is, when you sit there and say, that is the guy, who is it for you?
Nobody has ever asked me that before. And I'm not sure there is the guy. There is one. I mean, there's many leaders who I admire and respect. Patton, George C. Patton, one. Churchill is huge for me. My signature has probably the best leadership quote I've ever seen, which is sometimes doing your best isn't enough. Sometimes you have to do what's required. It's a Churchill quote. I think that sums up my thought process on this stuff. Don't let yourself off the hook by saying I gave the best. Leaders throughout history, though, all have something to offer. You look at Napoleon, right? Who, depending on who you talk to, could be vilified, right? But he also, you give a man a ribbon and he'll give you his life. Paraphrasing what he said. He was an amazing leader. So to say there's one,
yeah,
I think everybody has a lesson to take.
Yeah. Well, it's like asking, somebody who their favorite kid is. Every now and then they'll tell you, but for the most part, it's like, no, it's all no. But it's hard to pinpoint favorite movie, favorite this, favorite that when there's so many of them. But I figured there'd be a hodgepodge of them, and it's just interesting. I mean, there's not a right answer.
Right. No, of course not. Washington actually comes to mind too, right? Because he he was so true to who he was. He could have been king,
Mm.
but he knew who he was, and that was not what he wanted. And although that he could resist that power, he literally they wanted to make him king of America. He said no.
Oh, so much good stuff. And, we could talk history for days and days and days. And certainly that's something that so many of the people that hear you speak or go on these trips will get a piece of. I want to wrap it up with this. I said, bringing it all together and so much of your passion and your background and your history of what you have done. And I know that you support a very important organization, Tunnels to Towers Foundation. And I wondered if we could use our remaining time to talk more about that, why it's important to you, and give people a little bit of background.
Yeah, what they're doing over there is absolutely amazing. Their Tunnel to Tower, if you're unaware, was started when after the collapse of the towers on 9/11. I think it's Ben Stiller. I can't think of his first name, but the founder's brother was a firefighter who ran through the tunnels to get to the towers to help out, and he lost his life in the towers. And so they now give back to first responders and military through a couple different ways. If you're severely injured, they will give you. They're building homes, is really what, for Gold Star families and injured veterans and first responders. So if you're severely injured and you need a home that will accommodate that, they build that for you and give that to you. Or you're the surviving spouse because you've made the ultimate sacrifice. And I've done 3 deployments, one as a spouse, and the hardest thing in the world is to stay home while your spouse goes overseas.
That's right.
I can't imagine I'd much rather go than stay, having done them both. I can't imagine what it would be like then to not have your significant other come home from that. And so the least we could do is provide something for them to take some of that pressure off. And giving a home, that's huge. A mortgage-free home. So, I donate a portion of all my speaking fees to the Tunnel for Towers Foundation. I've been doing that for a number of years, and it's just something we've got to support those who have given everything.
Yeah. And something that I learned, I was so honored and lucky in 2018 to go on a USO tour to visit multiple branches of the military in Kuwait. And it was through the Kansas City Royals. And, there I am sitting side by side with George Brett and a few other former greats. And, we're talking to, I don't know that we ever talked to any Navy over there, but we talked to Army, we talked to Air Force, we talked to Marines, and one, it just blew my mind that they kept thanking us. And it's like, no, we're here to thank you. And they want to thank us for providing for coming over, providing the distraction, with baseball and TV and all that. And that's like, I get it, but I still couldn't get over, like, we're here to thank you. But what the response kept being was we're just doing what we signed up for. Thank our families that are at home. And so that's, I don't mean to understate or take too lightly the whole thank you for your service, but I always feel like when you thank someone for your service, you really need to thank their families and the support back at home as well, because that is a lot. That's not always what they signed up for.
Frequently it's not. And, I joke about my practice wife, and Gina's a lovely woman. I have no, I only say practice because it only lasted 17 months. And even though I was active duty at the time, she didn't know what she was signing up for.
Yeah.
And many don't, so, it's like I said, it's the hardest thing in the world. Just imagine, you, especially if, you start off, you're together in a household and then somebody disappears for 6 months at a time. And then they come back and try and reintegrate, right? So you've already made adjustments for them not being there. And then they come back and they try and reintegrate. And it's, I've got all this, I don't need this, right? And it's disruptive. And if the marriage isn't strong, it's going to break.
without a doubt. And just an important, I think, message for everybody to hear as they think about our military and whether those be active or veterans of this country. If you want to learn more about Dave, his services, his story, and you can learn more about the book and blogs and podcasts, keynotes, everything, lockedonleadership.com. Dave Rosenberg, I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. So glad to have been able to get to know you in recent months, and looking forward to, I know you're very generous with your advice of learning from you along the way as well. So I appreciate you spending time today, Dave, on Rounding the Bases.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Joel. And likewise, I'm looking forward to us just, getting to learn more from what you've got, because you offer so much as well. And the fact that you're here doing this and taking your lessons and giving them to the community as well, that's huge. So you're serving.
I appreciate it. It's what it's all about. And that's something that we can all do. Thanks to Dave, and thanks to everybody for listening.
Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.